everyone. I've been enjoying the session so far. I'm wearing a different hat today than I was yesterday. So instead of theological presentation, I'm going to present a business presentation. I often tell people who are multi-talented like me is you have to gravitate to the gifts that bring fruit. And so for me, this has been a fruitful venture. So this is where I build my tents. So my passion is ministry and study of theology. This is what's been paying my bills. So I appreciate what's been paying my bills and what's been doing in terms of help. I think everyone has to one is given this gift, another's given that gift by the same Spirit. I always admire looking at a few YouTubes of Archbishop Dennis playing the guitar and just going forth with that. Check him out from time to time. Pastor Davis and I, Bishop Davis and I, have a passion with keyboards. So we like doing all those things to help out. But today I want to talk to you about 501c3, talk about the basic structure of the church. I call this a church digital seminar. My firm is called DMG Professional Services. It's a nationwide service consultant firm. We provide professional service for nonprofit religious corporations. That's sort of my specialty, although I deal with a lot of profit corporations too. Our company covers the nation, especially this day and time. Since 2013, I've been mostly digital with a lot of my clients, where before 2013, I had to jet all over the country all the time. So thank God for all this technology now, which keeps me from jetting all over the country from a business standpoint. And of course, since 2016, I've been able to travel the world each week on the internet. So I've been able to handle most of my ministry projects over the internet like I have my business projects, which allows me to spend more time with my family and stay involved with them because all I have to do is walk down the hall. And so it helps out. We specialize in accounting and bookkeeping services, but we also have church consulting. We deal with clergy tax planning. We don't do clergy tax preparation anymore. We just do clergy tax planning. Organizational and management training for churches and ministries nationwide. My experience is I've been a clergy tax specialist for over 40 years. I have a dual MBA in both nonprofit financials and nonprofit law. And of course, I've been a professional clergyman for over 60 years now. We're living in a digital age, as I mentioned earlier, and all of you well know, and I think that's important. We've been able to fulfill the mandate I feel that Jesus had, where we can take the gospel into all the world. Just about the whole world is wired now. When I get off the plane in South Africa and I see everybody with a cell phone in their hand, and you think about Bush countries years ago, the whole world is wired. I go to Great Britain and I see internet cafes, and it's just almost we can come up anywhere. And social networks like Facebook and apps like WhatsApp and Magic Jack has put us in touch with a digital age where we are actually serving and getting people all over the world. So this has been a tremendous effort for us as we bring things together and understand where we are in this digital community. That being said,
yes, sir.
I think all of us have got to understand that we've got to have an online community. COVID-19 has changed the landscape in terms of where we are with brick and mortar churches. So it's changed things in terms of looking at this from an online community and the things that we have to be involved with our cell phones, our computers, our laptops. It's put us in a position that we have to understand both our online community in terms of doing business and in doing ministry. It's helped us out tremendously in terms of getting these things together. So we're faced with this idea of church versus community. And because of the complexity of ministry, we have to decide whether you have extension or a new project that you want to call a church or a community. There's a difference. And I like to take some time here just to mention this idea. Most of us think of church in terms of our houses of worship instead of people themselves. And of course, church has gone through this idea of dealing with the church as the body of Christ and church as a house of worship, which we go to the house of worship to worship, yet we are the church, the people of God. So in terms of looking at in terms of community, which is where the church began as a communist community, and everything was dealing with the fact that everything was in a community effort, community understanding. And so we developed that concept and that idea. House of worship, in a sense, kind of isolates us. And one of the benefits, I think, of COVID-19, it has forced us to get out of the four walls and try and get us out into the world where we're supposed to be doing instead of isolating ourselves from the world. So our vision is to connect. That should be our missionary vision, to connect. Connect our products, our books, our media, our gospel. Everything is to connect. We'll keep waiting for people to come into our house of worship when we're supposed to be going outside our house of worship. We're to go into all the world. So whatever means is necessary for us to get in all the world seems to be an effort that's involved. Well, all of this has to do with 501c3. I'm going to tell you in a minute. The hybrid church model is emerging as a norm, as it is leading us in a polarized culture. And some of the battle lines drawn are emerging and are semi-permanent cultural fixtures. We've got to understand this team effort, that not only do we have a physical place of worship, but we got a hybrid ministry, because some of us every week are ministering to people worldwide now. We don't have an audience just in our community or just in the pews or the seats sitting in front of us. But when we open up our cameras, open up our webcams, we are actually opening up to the world. And we are reaching people, far more reaching than we ever have before. We're in the greatest time of evangelism that we can be into if we could just understand the difference between marketing and evangelism. Online ministry may feel strange to some of us, frustrating and even alien to those who see it as a concession needed to survive the weird world of COVID-19 quarantine. But in truth, many effective churches have offered online worship for years. And if they're serious about their stated desire to share Christ with their community and minister to members, churches that have adopted online worship in this period should continue. And I mention that because I know of churches that want to stop online worship now and just go back into the church. No, we've opened up a whole new venue of things that we can reach worldwide. And so we don't need to stop it. We need to continue it because there's some things that are going forward. I always mention 7 last words of a dying church. We've never done it this way before. And so some of us are all messed up in the fact that we don't want to try new things. We don't want to change. We don't want to venture out. We just want to keep doing the same old, day in and day out. But if we're going to have a survival church, we're going to have to be one that's going to change and can change the complexity of what we're doing. We're not changing our core gospel. We're just changing the methods. I'm not going to compromise on the core values, the essentials of the faith, but I am going to change how I present those essentials and how it presents it to the world. That becomes most important. So we all have to evaluate our vision, our goals, our planning, what solutions we want, what successes we want to get, what's the process that involved. We've got to analyze things over and over. We got to strategically go into some sort of strategy that we can get in. And on top of it all, we got to pray. I think that's primarily important too. So a hybrid church, I want to just point out, is simply becoming church. The debate between in-person church versus online church has always been somewhat of a false one. But 2023 is the year where the hybrid church model will simply become church. We're going to be doing a combination of online and in-person. We're not going to eliminate in-person church. We're not going to eliminate hybrid-based church. So in other words, hosting churches online and in person is just how we do church to reach the next generation. Our generation is digital. Our generation we're coming into is very astute in terms of technology, and we have to go where they are. So the church is becoming versus technological, so we can get some things together. Now, so beginning then, how do we build a community? And so many of us are discovering that our community now is not just in our neighborhood. Sometimes you can have a church in Texas and reaching a community, people in Kansas, having a church in Florida, reaching people in New York, and they want to be a part of your community. So our community now, and this is the new norm, is not limited to geographical boundaries. And so we find ourselves not being locked in to geographical boundaries anymore. There are people, and I know we've had dioceses and geographical locations where we try to keep our networks within certain states and dioceses. It's becoming an old model because people are reaching out and cross-sectioning anywhere as they feel the Lord is leading them to connect with different ministries. Some of us have ministries being connected with us overseas in Africa and India and China and where else. I have podcasts that reach nearly around the world. And believe it or not, most of the ministry that I do in my podcast is reaching more in India than it is in the United States. By the way, India is becoming the largest population in the world now. It is surpassing China in terms of being the largest population in the world. So you'd be surprised what's going on literally around the world in terms of Christianity. We're in a bubble in Christianity here. But here's what we've got to do. No matter what your venue, no matter what your audience, no matter what you're trying to do, here's what we have to understand. The basic needs of people today. What is it that people want? Let's talk about that. I listed 5 things that I consider to be the basic needs of people today. Why do they come to you? Whether it's online or in person, number 1, they need a place to belong. People are hungry for a place to belong. As Bishop Smith was talking earlier about the gay couple that came into his church, they were looking for a place to belong. When we reject people, no matter what their background or what they're looking for, we are eliminating them a place to belong. People are looking for a place to belong. When they came to Jesus, Zacchaeus, come down from the tree. I need to come to your house. They are looking for a place to belong. The world knows it's already condemned. They need a place to belong. And I think that's where we come to in the church. Number 2, we need a sense of balance. We have to balance out. We can't just condemn people. We've got to love them. And so we have to get to the point that conviction is better than condemnation. People are really looking for, number 3, authentic relationships. They know the gaming. They know that when they come to you, they're looking for a relationship that's going to be authentic. They're not looking for the games. They've seen that outside. They're not expecting to see the facade, the mask, the things that are in the street, but they're looking for authentic relationships. Believe it or not, people are hungry for spiritual answers. I found out in 9/11, I talked to a lot of people who began to pour in the church after the Twin Tower disaster, looking for spiritual answers. And you know what I heard from a lot of people? They found a sideshow, and they didn't find spiritual answers. And they went right back out. Although, and here's the major thing. People are looking for help through transitions. We're the only organization that kills its wounded. And we have to be very careful. People are wounded. They're looking for help through transitions. These are the 5 major needs of people today. These are psychological needs, but they're also spiritual needs. They're what people are looking for in our church. And so if our church is not solid, now I bring all this up to talk about the business end, because if we don't understand what our purpose is, then we can't strengthen up our structure. But we've got to get this purpose thing down. Fact, place to belong, a sense of balance, authentic relationships, spiritual answers, and help through transitions. They're not coming to be entertained. They're not coming lazy. They see that all the time. They're looking for some genuineness. Often mentioned, I saw information once says, if you want to know how popular the pastor is, come to Sunday morning. You want to know how popular God is, come to the prayer meeting. Two different emphases. So let's talk about that. We've been talking about what makes a spiritual church. Let's talk about a legal church. What does that mean? So in order for a church of ministry to retain its status with the Internal Revenue Service, that bad word, and with the states in which it is incorporated and registered to do business, it must operate within certain limitations. Jesus even said this, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God things that are God. Now, you can operate and be a church without being incorporated, without anything else. You can. Why should you? I often deal with a lot of hybrid churches during the pandemic, debating on whether the fact they should even incorporate their hybrid ministry and things that are involved. Well, yes, it's important. Your name is your first connection toward making your dream a reality. So choose it wisely. Your name is your first connection toward making your dream a reality. What does God envision you with? Because your name, in marketing, your name is important. People should not have to wonder who you are and what you're about. You should pick a name that doesn't need to be questioned. You can explain your purpose later, but at least you don't have to explain your name. Your name shouldn't have to be explained. I went to a church recently that was called the Amani Deo. That's Latin for the image of God. But who knows what that was? The Amani Deo. And they wanted to be real deep. Well, why don't you just call it the image of God? You know, you got to have a name that people can relate to. I'll tell you funny that happened to me in terms of a name. When I first came to North Carolina, I was living in Rocky Mount. So I've been doing this extensive study on glory. So I had found out that the glory of God, the kabod in the scripture, always in terms of being in a physical realm, wanted to be in a section called the resting place. So every time God was trying to get them, when they came out of the wilderness, to house the glory within a resting place. Of course, the first resting place of the glory became the Ark of the Covenant. It's the resting place. So me and my ingenious mind decided when I wanted to open a church, I wanted to call it the resting place, because this is a repository of God's glory. That was my marketing line down. Well, I opened up in a civic center building in Rocky Mount. After about 6 months, it became evident my church wasn't growing. And the word I started getting from the community around town was that they thought it was a senior citizen home because it was named the resting place. It was very interesting and a humbling experience to find out that what people thought of what I thought was not the same. So choose your name wisely. I'll tell you that joke from my experience. Of course, I did rename my church. It was renamed and called the Refresh Church. And so I was able to grow the church when the name changed. So it is interesting. So evaluate your names and choose wisely. Why incorporate it? Your legal status is important for protection. Protect your personal assets. That's one of the reasons you want to incorporate. You want to protect your personal assets. You don't want your assets to be at risk. There are some tax advantages of incorporation. Has nothing to do with being a spiritual church. It has to do with being a legal church. Gives your business some credibility by being incorporated. If you're going to do banking, banking wants to know, are you a legitimate entity of the state? Do you have a tax exempt number? So when you go to do business with the bank, they want to know, are you a legal corporation? Are you a legal business? So for protection, realizing certain tax advantages, and it gives your business some more credibility by being incorporated. Because I have people beating up time. Why should I incorporate? This is why. Operating as a non-stock corporation, this is a contrast between regular corporations that sell stock. Churches really shouldn't, if you're going to incorporate, you're going to incorporate as a non-stock corporation. However, it is important to note that a non-stock for-profit corporation can be created. These are often only for a specific transaction and do not serve as a long-term purpose. In other words, you need to be a non-stock corporation because that puts you into a better advantage as a church rather than being a stock corporation. Now you can consult your lawyer or your accountant for how your structure should be set up. I'm only offering some general advice. Here are some of the rules that are so important for churches. It applies to nonprofit corporations and make them unique. Now, let me explain to you why we talk about nonprofit and profit. Nonprofit doesn't mean you can't make any money or you cannot be wealthy as a nonprofit corporation. It means if you're a nonprofit corporation, it means that the corporation can become as rich as it wants. But if you are a profit-making corporation, individuals of that corporation can become as rich as they want. So if you own your own corporation and you're a profit-making organization, you can make profit for yourself. But now, if you want to become a church or ministry, that organization can make all the money that it wants, but you're limited as to how much money you can make from that organization. There are rules for nonprofit organizations. And here's where people misunderstand the difference. The organization itself can become as rich as it wants. You're just limited as how much reasonable compensation you can take out of the corporation that may be rich. If you want to be rich yourself, then form a profit-making corporation. And you can take as much money as you want out of your own corporation. But because you say this corporation is nonprofit, it is owned by the members of the corporation, you're limited in the amount of compensation you can receive from that. I hope that explains the difference. I want people to understand the difference between the two. When forming your business, it's important to be clear about your intentions for your corporation. If you plan to operate as a nonprofit, it means that your nonprofit corporation is going to be the beneficiary of all you do. If you're trying to incorporate to make yourself a millionaire, don't form a church. Form yourself a business. You can make all the money you want. But if you're going to form a church, you're trying to form the church so that the Church of Jesus Christ can become as wealthy as it wants to carry out all the ministry and the business of what it wants to do as the church. So therein becomes the difference. Some states such as Delaware, require that your intent to operate as a nonprofit, along with any exemptions, be disclosed upon the formation of your business. Most states state that you got to talk about within the incorporation documents the purpose of establishing that document. Nonprofit corporations can operate under IRS Code 501, mainly C3. There are a lot of designations under Code 501. There's a publication 557 that you can get from the IRS. It's a free publication that tells you as you can operate. I'll talk about the benefits of being. Now, you don't get a 501c3 to become a nonprofit organization. You're already nonprofit when you incorporate it. You're going to have certain advantages by getting the IRS incorporation. Now, according to his IRS code, section C3, according to IRS government, to be a tax exempt under section 501c3, an organization must be organized and operate exclusively for exempt purposes set forth in section 501c3, and none of its earnings may inure to any private shareholder or individual. I told you that was the information that needs to be done when you're forming a corporation. Now, take notice of that word inure. It's very important. It is a legal term. That means that individuals in a nonprofit organization cannot benefit from the assets of a nonprofit organization. It is called inurement. You do not own a nonprofit organization. You cannot will it to your children. You cannot make beneficiary. It belongs to the organization. If your nonprofit organization dissolves, assets must be given to another nonprofit organization. You cannot will the assets of your nonprofit corporations to your children because they have no right to that. It is called inurement. because if you want to make a benefit show, make yourself a profit-making organization, and you leave all the millions you want to them, and you can live as luxuriously as you want. There are watchdog organizations that watch organizations like ours who are nonprofit. There's a group called Ministry Watch that makes it its business to find out what organizations that are nonprofit are doing and whether or not they operate in certain guidelines. So there are other organizations like that to make sure too. So we must make sure we're following the guidelines of nonprofit organizations. So we work within the rules. When they came to Jesus and they talked about Caesar's inscription on the corn, and they want to know, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Jesus said to his disciples, you give the Caesar what is the Caesar's, and unto the Lord what is the Lord's. They operate within the confines of a government that we live in. We are confined under that government. The rule is, when we get to the book of Acts, chapter 4, when they came back to the company after healing the man who was at the beautiful gate, Peter said something very interesting to that fact. It becomes a kind of rule book to us that I think we need to learn and understand. He said something that was very, very important. He said it is better to obey God than to obey man. So we have to be careful on what our government rules. And we talked about that earlier. Gender bending and all things are going. There are restrictions in 501 that we can't restrict because of race, color, or creed. We can't participate in politics. All those things that are there for an organization, not for individuals. And we can make exemptions within our creeds and our bylaws that exempt us from certain rules that don't affect our exemption status with the government. Well, let me move a little bit further. So the church's 3 safeguards outside of the Holy Spirit and the headship of the church is incorporation for liability, our creeds and bylaws for government. The government does not govern the church. Let's keep that in mind. It does not govern the church. It polices the church, but it does not govern the church. We are governed by our creeds and bylaws. If you ever go to court, judges want to know where your bylaws are, where your creeds, because there's nothing on the books in the court that governs the church. So when we shouldn't even be going to court for the church anyway, but if you do, he wants to see a copy of your bylaws to see how the church has set up its government. So he's going to judge the case based on the church's creeds and bylaws. So as I review bylaws and creeds for churches, we have to make sure that you have things covered that you want to get covered, and everything is covered. So in case of liability, you're covered with the right thing. Now, a tax-exempt status are opportunities for you. They're opportunities. See how I put these words? Here's the church's 3 safeguards from a legal standpoint. Incorporation is for your liability. Creeds and bylaws are for your government. If there is no creed or bylaw, a judge has to make his own decision. So you do your creeds and bylaws so you can govern your church by your creeds and bylaws. Opportunities for your church are done by tax-exempt status. If you want to get funding from the government for tax-exempt status, or funding from any corporation that have foundations that give the nonprofit corporation charities or all, you have to be set up legally in order to take advantage of these opportunities. So a tax-exempt status gives you opportunities. It does not legalize you. You're legalized by your incorporation. Your creeds handle your government, and opportunities are done by your tax-exempt status. So there are 3 concerns of the church. The courts, and we can handle the courts by having good bylaws. Courts avoiding any legal issues surrounding the activities and structure of your church so that we don't have to deal with the courts. The IRS, being in compliance with the guidelines and regulations, we don't have to worry about the IRS. Congress, we need to monitor legislative activity that it will impact the church world so that we know how to adjust our government based on what the government itself is doing. Since we work outside of the government, but we live within the government, we have to know what the government is doing. That becomes very important. I explain that to churches all the time. Church operations involve three things. It involves the minister, the board, and the church. None of these operate separately. And that becomes so important to understand where we are, that none of these operate separately. We operate in conjunction with the other. The minister does not run the church by himself. The board doesn't run the church by itself. The church itself, the congregation, doesn't run by itself. But you have to decide within your government structure whether the structure is done by pastoral leadership, board leadership, or congregational leadership, because those government regulations define how the church should be operating depending on how the management of the church is set up. Is set up by presbyterial control? Is it set up by trustee control? Or is it set up by congregational control? You decide how you set up your church government. That means that a nonprofit organization is really responsible to trustees. The obvious question is, who are the trustees? The board, the minister, or the congregation? Here's the church's financial picture. They're called funds. Churches operate under a legal term in terms of nonprofit accounting we call funds. So funds and accounts are different. So in your financials, you have to understand the difference between funds and accounts. Nonprofits are set up in a system called funds, F-U-N-D, not F-U-N. We can't have fun with the money. The monies are set up as funds. So that's called fund accounting, which means that its money management relates to the funds earmarked to and from different sources connected to the parent source. Now, I know this is accounting lingo, but I'm saying your financials are usually done and monies raised go into different funds under those accounts. So an account is set up as a system to manage the operation of the funds. So you would have a bank account, for instance. Within that bank account, you may have several funds. For instance, you might have a missionary fund, a Sunday school fund, you might have a general fund. And so funds come into what we call restricted and unrestricted funds. If restricted funds mean that the funds was raised for a specific purpose and can only be spent on that specific purpose. Non-restricted funds means it's raised for general purpose and any purpose of the church that money can be used for. So the church is limited then in how it collects funds. Are the funds restricted because you solicited for a specific purpose? It must be used for the purpose you solicited for. Or if it was solicited for a general purpose, then you can use it for any of the management systems or system of the church. Financial process is threefold. Those who collect it, here's the general rule. It don't always work this way, especially for small churches. But those collected should not be the ones counting. Those counting should not be the ones deposited. That's just a general safeguard. Of course, as I remember when I started my church in Baltimore years ago, I was collecting, counting, and depositing because we only had 4 members. As the church grew, I separated these functions. But, you have to work in how it works for you. This is the ideal. Practically, it may not work for some of you, but this is the idea. It keeps everybody safeguarded. Those collecting funds should not be the ones who accounting it. Those accounting it should not be the ones deposited. It's an ideal process. So here's our confusion in terms of doing this. Our name, our vision. I'm summarizing what I've been talking about. Our accountability, our legal status, our financial responsibility, and lastly, our management, which is extremely important. Investment strategies, I just send out. Don't think that the church can't have wealth or be prosperous. The issue is that members of the organizations cannot become wealthy off the organization, which is why I have my own business. This firm that I have, I can become as wealthy as I want from the firm. For my Organization, I cannot. I'm living it to get what we call, here's the buzz term from the IRS and from the law, reasonable compensation. And you say, what is reasonable compensation? Sometimes you don't know till you've been audited. But there are guidelines to set up what we call reasonable compensation. That's the IRS. When it looks at your organization and says, they say, well, you may not have been reasonable. So we're going to fine you because you didn't have what they consider to be reasonable compensation. But there are rules. We set our organizations up, our clients up to understand what reasonable compensation is and how you file certain guidelines so that everybody stays in compliance with the law. Investment ideas, insurance, life and health insurance, retirement for your staff, investment, real estate, money management, etc. All these investment ideas for church can be going. Growth managements, the organization. Now, I keep mentioning the organization can become wealthy because a lot of churches had the idea that they couldn't become wealthy as a church. You know, I had some clients that actually believed that they were supposed to give rid of all their money at the end of the year because they were nonprofit. So they empty out their bank accounts for the year and start fresh with nothing. I said, no. That doesn't mean that you empty out everything. Nonprofit don't mean you don't have no money. It just means you can't give all the money to the shareholders, but you can have money for the ends. So part of that and part of what we do is fundraising. And so we get those things in mind. Church leaders don't need to be told that budgets matter. You have to know it. Budgets set the pace for what a church considers important throughout a given year. Decisions made upon spending that determines how much staff members will get paid, how much will go to each ministry, how much will get set aside for reserves, how much will go toward basic operations. Of course, budgets aren't simply about costs. They depend on giving and other areas of revenue. As church leaders look ahead to a new budget year, you need to be able to forecast expected income. So you have to watch your income and expense like any other business and just pray and figure the Lord will provide. Jesus said, nobody sees the bill till you sit down and count up the costs. So we have to look at budgets, money management, get those things together so you can understand what those things involve and where it goes. I'm concluding here. Before proceeding with the formation of a nonprofit corporation or deciding to invest as a nonprofit, schedule an appointment with us. Our specialist has the expertise and experience to make sure that your nonprofit is in compliance and will be able to answer any questions that might be related to items such as tax exemption and IRS code. Here's my information. For more details, you can go to our website, dmgprofessional.com, or if you want to get started, just send me an email at dmgprofessional@gmail.com. I'm going to open up now for questions and comments. Stop, share.
Archbishop Golphin, I just want to thank you for the diligence and the material that you presented.
Yeah.
Some of us have had to learn this thing through hard knocks. So, and sometimes they're very, very painful. But I really thank you for presenting it the way you did.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Anybody have any other comments or questions? Dave, they didn't silence you. You can talk.
No, I included the website for publication 517. I would strongly suggest if you don't have that, you should go get that. That gives you a plethora of information about compliance. Archbishop taught me a long time ago there are 14 points of tort liability that every church should know as to how to become compliant if you're going to be a 501(c). And as you talk to him in DMG Professional, you can find out there's some circumstances that you don't necessarily need 501(c) status. If, for instance, your church is busy creating CDCs and other entities, that might not be the thing for you. But it's best for you to go, generally speaking. Last thing, because he taught me well, every church, once you have been chartered by your state, you receive your EIN, the IRS considers you tax exempt. But there is a difference between that status and receiving a letter of designation, which I'll let him explain to you, because everybody doesn't need a letter of designation.
It is, as I mentioned, it's an opportunity for you. That website is irs.gov, irs.gov. You can get all the information you want from the IRS from off that site. On that site, irs.gov, you can put in, search publication 557, which gives you all the information about the church that you can find out around that site.
Archbishop, this is Felton Smith.
Yes, Bishop.
Your presentation was impeccable.
Thank you, sir.
Enlightening and exposing. We could see ourselves in it.
Amen.
And I've been going at it. I started as a child, age 7. And I had to find the way to receive funds, preached at every kind of church. As a boy preacher in Chattanooga, they called me Boy Wonder. I realized after a while how critical it was to be truly legal and organized.
Yep.
And in 1961, still a teenager, I organized Bread of Life Ministries through the late attorney Sam Jackson, who was the undersecretary of HUD, and collaborated.
Jackson.
Collaborated with the Brown versus Board of Education. And like you said, and others said, and Archbishop Lands, it was the worst thing that could have happened in reality. It was a good idea, but poorly implemented. We gave up and lost too much of ourselves. And there's no such thing, as we've discovered, that equal but separate. And there's no such thing as coming together with the pretense of being truly a one people in a one situation. Somebody always loses. We can never afford to put ourselves in disrepair through negligence and the lack of knowledge. I would surmise that for those of us who are on, we would connect and commit to you the usage of yourself and your corporation. And I can think of almost every church in my jurisdiction and churches throughout the nation that I know of who would be really blessed and empowered through your sagacity, your information. You've done the deep dive. You went all the way to the bottom of the sea and brought treasure. And I'm just moved by your presentation, sincerely moved by it. I want to thank you personally for what you've done today.
Yeah, we manage over 300 clients. I've got probably over 1,000 clients that I've serviced. I actually consult with CPAs and attorneys all over the country who seek my knowledge in nonprofit law and nonprofit accounting, especially the rules. I have a plethora of clients who I work with on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, annual basis, and I'm called into various situations. I get attorneys call me all the time. I got 5 calls from attorneys while I'm sitting here, want to know some information about nonprofit law. It is a specialty within itself. They may have clients, they pay me to help do research for their clients. So it's a lot involved with that. And then doing all of this, I take time to do also my theological training. So I balance all this up and try to get things together with all that. But it keeps me on my feet and keeps me well situated. I'm trying to build a staff so I can have more time to do other things. But it's been a trying situation. I hope this has benefited a lot of you. Again, that site is rs.gov. My site is dmgprofessional.com. You can go there or you can email me at the address I gave earlier, dmgprofessional@gmail, and we'll set you up with a consultant. Free for our first time is a free consultant session. After that, we can talk about what it costs to get you started.
Wearing two hats there, brother.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I'm thinking about employing you to share with our constituents for my convocation in June. We'll be in Knoxville, Tennessee. And
I love Knoxville.
oh yeah, it's beautiful. It's growing. We just need pastors to be empowered. They got vision, they got passion,
Yes,
they lack knowledge, and God has blessed you to have it. You're a blessing to the body ministry. Thank you, sir.
man. Thank you.
I thought that would be a perfect segue for you to talk about the work that you do in regards to helping ministers, understand that we don't just preach, we govern, and we govern our finances.
We talk a lot about clergy tax planning too, and how a minister ought to be set up in terms of that. Archbishop Johnson put a couple books in the chat there, which are pretty good. There, Christianity Today provides some interesting material. They have a church and clergy consulting section. Attorney Richard Hammer puts out an annual compensation for clergy and churches every year, which is extremely good. There are a lot of different resources out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there too, regarding churches and what they should do. And I run into misinformation all the time. People thought they could do this or thought they could do that and find out they can't. Now here's one of the things you have to understand, that in getting a 501c3 status, it doesn't mean that the government is ruling you. But if you're getting your status for opportunity, if you don't need the opportunities, you don't need the status. If you don't need grants or need money or anything like that to deal with, you don't want to operate in that standard, then you may not need the status. But if you expect to get funding, then you need the status because you need to get funding. And it's involved. A lot of organizations years ago used to embark on getting what we call group status from the IRS, where the parent organization had the exemption, would give out certificates of status to their constituencies or the churches that are involved in that group and cover it. There's a lot of rules for group exemption. When I've done webinars and seminars in the past for groups and explained to all that's involved with group exemption, smaller organizations don't want to deal with all of the red tape that's involved with that, and usually just try to get churches to individually get your 501c3 status. It's becoming more easier to get, but the process is dragging out because they just don't have the manpower. I don't know, Mia, you heard about passports, but it's taking 6 to 8 months now to get a passport. And so passports becoming crazy, and it's becoming longer and longer wait and people to get 501c3 when you want the status. It's not that it's a problem with you. It's just they just don't have the manpower. The IRS is basically 2 to 3 years behind on audits. Bishop Davis mentioned the 14-point check that the IRS does in terms of establishing you. It's in publication 557. What is considered a legal church? I worked as a enrolled agent with the IRS during the 90s. And when we audited churches, we went through the 14-point information that's in publication 557 to determine whether a church is a legal church or not. You have to maintain those 14 points to say that you're a legal church. And the reason why that was established, because it was people who abused the nonprofit status just to avoid taxes. For instance, somebody might decide to incorporate as a church and have a church in their home so they can avoid paying property taxes. So they apply for exemptions in their county for paying property taxes for their church, but they're really legally not a church. So because of the scams and all, IRS had to come up with a rule book as what constitutes a church. Unfortunately, we good have to pay with the bad. So there are rule books to establish what is a legal church and what constitutes being a legal church, because there's always somebody scamming and trying to fool the system. It's not a problem with those of us who are trying to be honest and want to do what we do honestly, but there are always scammers out there. So we have to be very careful with that. Bishop Davis is putting up a copy of publication 557.
Keep this. You're responsible ultimately. Keep this.
It's a free publication. You can download it. It's a free publication. The IRS position is that ignorance of the law is no excuse, but sometimes we need the interpretation of the law, and that's where my firm comes in. How is the law to be interpreted? You can read that, but how do we interpret it? It's like I did earlier yesterday in talking about interpretation of scripture and hermeneutics and interpretation. You need somebody to interpret what you're reading. Same thing with biblical interpretation. We need legal interpretation. So we specialize in interpreting what publication 557 is all about. Archbishop Chase, I'll turn it back in your hands.
All right, amen. First, let me allow me to thank you. Another fabulous presentation. That's number one. Number two is I suggest, I refer, I condone, I promote anyone who is interested in establishing ministry, church, what have you, to get in touch with Archbishop Golphin, because obviously he knows his stuff. With that said, and with that in mind, are there any other questions? No? Any comments? No? All right, then we will see you at 7. See, that's a testament to the thoroughness of your presentation.
Amen.
That's when you cross the T and you dot the I and you carry the 1 to make the 3. Anyhow, nevertheless, at 7 o'clock this evening.
Amen.
Please be online because we're going to worship, just like we did last night. We're going to worship. Last night, Archbishop Lands preached his heart out. I had to call him up because he didn't stick around when he put the mic down. I thought he dropped the mic. And he was God. I said, Lord have mercy. I want to make sure he's okay. Because he was frothy. He was just about to stomp his foot. Now, if y'all went to the Baptist church, you'd understand about that one. But tonight we are going to have another brilliant sermon, time of worship, time of unity, a time of togetherness. And I encourage you to be back online at 7 p.m. That's 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central Time. And our speaker, I believe, did we decide that it was going to be Bishop Smith, Archbishop Golphin?
Yes.
Yes. So if you've never heard Bishop Smith preach before, you're in for a treat. You're in for a treat for any one of these gentlemen. I'm going to be honest with you, but you're in for a treat. Amen. So get ready. All right. Come with expectancy. Come with a mind and a heart to worship God. And I will see you, and we will see all of us at 7 p.m. Amen. Blessings to all of you, and have a good dinner.